What's poppin', y'all? My name is Phyllis Mackenzie, and welcome to Care Life Podcast. If you love the expression of creativity in visual, performing, literary, and culinary arts, then this is the podcast for you. So subscribe and follow our social media pages through the link in the description and be part of the family. Now, let's dive into today's episode. Well, good day to you all. My name is Phyllis Mackenzie, and welcome to Care Life Podcast, your home for all things art. And this is a brand new season where I'll be diving into books mostly for this month and maybe next month. And if you're just joining us, welcome. Drop that subscribe button and also follow. Turn on the notifications if you're on YouTube and comment. Comment. What word can we use? What word can we use? Just say Care Alive. When you comment on this episode and say Care Alive, I'll know you're a new subscriber. Follow us on social media at Podcast Mackenzie. That's Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Links will be in the description down below. And don't forget to check out our second podcast, that is Phyllis Mackenzie's Wicked Campfire podcast. Become a camper. If you love all things paranormal, that is a heavy podcast. It's not for the weak. So if you love things paranormal, join us there. If you love art, stay tuned here. And as you have read from the description, this is part 2 of Macbeth, where I read and summarize so you don't have to. If you haven't checked part 1, that's the one before this, and Hamlet came before that, and other episodes, of course, are before that. So just drop a listen to whichever you find your favorite. And for anybody who just loves or adores Dante Alighieri, The Divine Comedy is a couple episodes back. I read it and summarized it for you, so you don't have to. But today we will continue from where we left off. That is Act 3, Scene 4. We stopped last time at Act 3, Scene 3, where we realized that Fleance has run away and Banquo is now dead. So we head on to Act 3, Scene 4. And during the banquet that evening at the palace or at the castle, as everybody is enjoying the night and enjoying their meal, one of the hired murderers or goons or assassins arrives and tells Macbeth of Banquo's death and the escape of Fleance, his son. So he heads back to the banquet where one of the guests invites Macbeth to sit next to him. But Macbeth does not see an empty seat. And he gestures that and says that there's no empty seat, and everybody's like, oh my god, yeah, there is an empty seat right here, what do you mean? And he instead sees the ghost of Banquo shaking his bloody head as though in disappointment or disapproval. And in panic, Macbeth says to the ghost, that is obviously only being seen by him, that he should never ever shake his head to him again. And his words were, never shake thy gory locks at me. Gory meaning bloody. So never shake thy gory locks at me. Act 3, Scene 4, line 49 and 50. And at this point, it is obvious that only he can see the ghost. So it has everybody in the room wondering why Macbeth is yelling at the air. And Lady Macbeth thinks fast and manages to fool everyone by telling them that it's common for Macbeth to have these outbursts, and she pulls him out of the room and tries to calm him down, which Macbeth does calm down, and they return back to the banquet to entertain their guest. But when they get there, Macbeth raises a toast to Banquo, who, mind you, is dead, but as he's raising the toast, Macbeth is obviously saying, here's a toast to Banquo, who is still not here at the party. But the ghost returns and Macbeth panics again. So this time Lady Macbeth sends everybody off before Macbeth can say anything that could be incriminating. And when they are alone, Macbeth thinks of Macduff. Mind you, if you don't know, Macduff is the hero of this play, and he's wondering why Macduff has not been visiting them much. Of course, this disturbs him, and he doesn't know if Macduff is suspicious of him or not. So Macbeth is just sent into even more panic because he doesn't know if Macbeth is being suspicious or he's just being a traitor. And his actual words were, Macduff denies his person at our great bidding. Act 3, Scene 4, lines 128 and 129. And according to Macbeth, he thinks that he is already in too deep in his act of killing people, that if he were to return to who he was or who he once was, it would be just as tedious as going forth and killing more people to be who he may be in the future. And his words in lines 135 and 138 in Act 3, Scene 4 were, I am in blood stepped in far, that should I wade no more, returning were as tedious as go over. The words are everywhere here, but what he's actually saying is, I'm already in too deep, so if I go back, it would be as tiresome as going forth and killing more people. And this is the end of scene 4 of Act 3. And this brings us to scene 5. And nothing, and I can actually say nothing major happens here that could change the course of the play, as it features mostly witches, and which is unlikely for Shakespeare himself to write something like this, suggesting that somebody may have helped him in writing this scene. But whatever happens in scene 5 is not all that important because it doesn't change anything and the story doesn't continue until scene 6. So we'll just jump into scene 6 of Act 3. And in this scene, people around Scotland are becoming suspicious of the recent events, that is, the deaths that are happening and nature going chaotic. And even though they don't point fingers directly at Macbeth, they are sure that something just isn't right. And we learn that the royal sons, Malcolm and Donalbain, ran after their father's murder and they settled away from Scotland. So Malcolm is in England, living in the English court, Donalbain is in Ireland, and Macduff has traveled to England to try and get together the English army and come back and defeat Macbeth. So this is why he couldn't visit Macbeth, because he is not even in Scotland. And of course Macbeth should be worried, but not because that Macduff knows what he has done, but Macduff is planning to overthrow Macbeth. And just by bringing Malcolm back, if they overthrow Macbeth, it means that Malcolm will take his rightful place as heir of the throne. And this brings us to Act 4. Act 4 is not good. It's not good, it's confusing. And in Act 4, Scene 1, we meet the boss witch. Her name is Hecate, and the other three witches, and they seem to be standing around a cauldron. A cauldron like that witches pot with they cook everything, they just cook. The potions, the spells, the charms, the everything. And they seem to be making a potion or enchantment of some kind, and they're chanting words. And whoever will drink from their cauldron will experience double the hard work and double the troubles. And this is understood by scene 4, or by Act 4, Scene 1, line 10 and 11, where the witches are chanting, double, double, toil and trouble, fire burn and cauldron bubble. One of the witches feels a pain in her thumb, which is a sign that an evil person is approaching. And the only person who's actually approaching them is Hamlet. And in line 44 and 45 of this scene, in Act 4, they say, by pricking of my thumbs, something wicked this way comes. And Macbeth enters and demands to speak. He is in panic and suspicious of everyone and cannot seem to relax at all. And the three witches then show Macbeth three visions or apparitions at this point. And the three visions are of a man, not an entire man, just his head, wearing a armor, or just the helmet of the whole armor. You get the point. And this head is wearing the armor, and the head now warns Macbeth about Macduff. The second vision is about a bloody child. This child, this small baby that's just bloody, who says Macbeth won't be threatened by anyone born of a woman. And the third vision is of a child wearing a crown and holding a tree who says that Macbeth will not be defeated till the day that an actual forest moves up the castle walls. The actual words in scene 4, in Act 4, scene 1 were, "Beware, Macduff." That was the first vision of the man's head, line 71. Line 80 and 81 says, "None of woman born shall harm Macbeth." That is the bloody child saying this. And then line 92 and 93, which is the child with the crown and the tree, says, "Macbeth shall never vanquished be until Great Burman Wood." Great Burman Wood is the forest now. "Too high Dunsinane Hill shall come against him." Dunsinane Hill was the location where the castle was. The castle was called Dunsinane Castle. The place where it's built is Dunsinane Hill. The forest near the castle is called Great Burman Wood. You see? So until the day that Great Burman Wood walks and stands next to Dunsinane Castle is the day that Macbeth will be defeated. And this news seems to be good for Macbeth because he doesn't take much thought into it. But he still wonders if Banquo's children will ever be king, and of course he asks this to the witches. But instead of the witches answering, he sees Banquo's ghost again, and this time the ghost is pointing to a vision of a line of 8 kings and more being reflected on a mirror because they couldn't fit in the entire vision. And this just shocks Macbeth beyond anything. But even before he gets to ask the questions, just like before, the witches disappear. And Macbeth is informed by one of his messengers that Macduff has fled to England. And with this, Macbeth decides to act upon his first thought. Without thinking any further, whatever thought comes into his mind, he will from then henceforth, without deliberating, whether it's good or bad, he'll act upon it. And he says this in line 147, where he says, "The very firstlings of my heart shall be the firstlings of my hand." And Macbeth decides to send soldiers to kill everyone in Macbeth's castle. That includes his wife, his son, and servants. Absolutely any living thing that's walking will be killed. And that is the end of Act 4, Scene 1, which we dive immediately into Scene 2 of this act, where Lady Macduff and her son receive a visit from Ross, which right now, instead of being the royal messenger, he's now the royal visitor. And she tells Ross that she's angry at her husband for leaving them alone while he went to England. And it's just a small chat or small talk, but when Ross leaves, immediately a strange messenger appears or arrives at their castle and tells Lady Macduff that even though she doesn't know who he is, they should leave at that very moment. But of course, Lady Macduff does not understand what this man is saying, and when he leaves, the murderers or assassins or whatever we want to call them, they appear. And when they come, they stab the poor boy. He was young, so they stab him, and then they chase Lady Macduff all around the castle, who at this point is screaming, "Murderers, murderers, help, help, murderers," when you're being chased by somebody with a knife and your son has just died. You don't have any energy to run. I wonder why she was running. But in Act 4, Scene 3, in this particular scene, it takes us all the way to England. We are now away from Scotland. It takes us to the military camp outside of the King's Palace in England. And Macduff has arrived to join forces with Malcolm, who is the Prince of Cumberland, and the dead king now, King Duncan's son. And along with English soldiers, he wanted for them to all come together so they can invade Scotland and defeat Macbeth. So as they're discussing this, Ross arrives and gives Macduff the terrible news that his whole entire family has been murdered. Now, Malcolm is more than determined to go and kill Macbeth himself. And he says this after he receives the news by Ross, which says, "Your wife and babes savagely slaughtered." Act 4, Scene 3, line 205. So, Act 4 is all about death. Death, death, death of an entire family, an innocent child, an innocent lady who was just trying to see her husband, was just longing to see her husband, and she ends up dead. And this death came about because of poor judgment from Macbeth. Because he decided not to think about anything going forth, he has now caused the death of an entire household. But after all these deaths, and people now striving for revenge, and now we know that Macduff has gone to England in order to join forces with Malcolm and the English soldiers so they can come and attack Macbeth. We dive into Act 5, which is the final act in this whole entire play. But this act is so long, so engaging. It has 9 scenes. And we will go obviously one by one through the scenes. And Act 5, Scene 1, it takes us back to Dunsinane Castle, which is Macbeth's castle currently. And in there, Lady Macbeth's bedroom, we meet brand new characters. We meet the doctor and this gentlewoman who is like Lady Macbeth's handmaid. So, this handmaid has been seeing Lady Macbeth sleepwalking and writing a letter and then going back to bed. So, all the while, she was still asleep, and the doctor wants to know what Lady Macbeth has been saying while she's sleepwalking, but the woman won't tell him because what she overheard was something that she shouldn't have in the first place. And now she wants the doctor to hear it from himself, because if that does happen, then the woman won't get in trouble. It will be the doctor. She won't have tattletaled on anybody. So they see Lady Macbeth sleepwalking again that night, and she seems to be washing her hands this time, saying, "Out, damned spot! Out, I say!" This is Act 5, Scene 1, line 35. There isn't any blood in her hands technically, but she seems to be washing, but can't get rid of the blood. Then she says she never thought the old man could have so much blood on him. That is Act 5, Scene 1, line 39 and 40. And still sleepwalking, she smells her hands and says, "Here's the smell of blood still. All the perfumes of Arabia will not sweeten this little hand." Act 5, Scene 1, line 50 and 51. And finally, as though giving up, she says, What's done cannot be undone." Act 5, Scene 1, line 68. And this quote becomes one of the most famous quotes from Macbeth. What's done cannot be undone, because she said this the very night that they killed King Duncan. She did these very same actions the night that they killed King Duncan. She was trying to wash her hands, and now the thought is haunting her in her dreams, and now she's sleepwalking, reenacting the night. And once the doctor sees this, the doctor says that the lady needs God more than she needs medicine. And as her troubles are more spiritual than physical, because somehow she is involved in murder, they don't know who is dead, but he tells the woman to take away anything from the Lady Macbeth that the lady could use to kill herself. And that's the end of Scene 1. Lady Macbeth is now going crazy, sleepwalking, reenacting everything that happened during the night that they killed King Duncan. She can't forget that she had blood, the king's blood, in her hands. She can't forget the smell of the blood in her hands. And now the servant knows, and the doctor knows. So in Act 5, Scene 2, a group of Scottish soldiers are marching towards Macbeth's castle. They are chanting about who's coming from England to defeat them. And the names that appear are Malcolm, the Prince of Cumberland, Old Seward, who is Malcolm's uncle, Young Seward, who is Malcolm's cousin, and Macduff. And the soldiers are hoping to meet the English soldiers in Birnam Wood, which is the same forest from the vision of the witches. Because if you remember earlier, one of the visions from the witches, it said that Macbeth will never be defeated till the day that Birman Wood moves forward towards the castle. And now these soldiers are just right outside the Burnham Woods. And in Act 5, Scene 3, inside Macbeth's castle, we meet Satan. That is Seyton. Satan, who is the servant of Macbeth. And even soldiers are leaving him, he is still confident in the witch's prophecies that no one will defeat him. And this is in Act 5, Scene 3, line 2 and 3, where he says, "Till Burnham Wood remove to Dunsinane, I cannot taint with fear." A servant then arrives with the news that 10,000 English soldiers are headed towards the castle through the forest, and Macbeth calls for all his armor to be presented to him so he can prepare for the battle, even though it's still early for this. And as he was a warrior before and throughout his whole entire life, including the day he became king, he is prepared to die in battle. And he says this in Act 5, Scene 3, line 32. When Macbeth asks the doctor for his wife's condition, he is informed by the doctor that the lady is suffering from hallucinations. But Macbeth orders the doctor to cure his wife and Scotland too. And the doctor refuses because he knows what's going on. So he refuses and is glad to leave and never return to the castle, regardless of any amount of money that he may be offered. And that's the end of Scene 3 in Act 5. But in Scene 4 of Act 5, it takes us out of the castle and all the way to the edge of Birmingham Woods. Malcolm, Macduff, and the English soldiers who have joined forces with the Scottish soldiers. And Malcolm tells them to cut down a tree branch in Birman Wood and hold it in front of themselves. This way, the soldiers in the castle will not be able to know the number of the soldiers attacking. So you see, it won't be the trees that are moving, it's soldiers holding the trees. That's why the third prophecy, it showed a child with a crown holding a tree. This child is actually Malcolm, the rightful heir, and he's telling the soldiers to hold the trees so they can march forth and they won't be discovered their actual numbers. And in Act 5, Scene 5, takes us off the forest and back into Dunsinane Castle, where Macbeth says that the castle walls are strong and the attackers won't be able to get in. They will starve to death outside the walls. And Macbeth and Satan hear the cries of women outside, and Macbeth says that he had almost forgotten the taste of fears. At this point, we realize that Macbeth has now forgotten what it feels like to be afraid. And he says this in Act 5, Scene 5, line 12 all to 14, where he says, "I have supped full of horrors. Dariness, familiar to my slaughterous thoughts, cannot once start me." And though the play doesn't explain how exactly she died, Macbeth is informed that his wife is now dead, and it is implied that she jumped to her death. At this point, Macbeth says she should have died hereafter, in Act 5, Scene 5, line 17. And with this specific line, you can go about it two ways. One way is good, where you might think that she should have died hereafter means that the wife had so much to live for and should have lived longer and died a few years later. But you can take the bad route and think of it as she was being inconsiderate and dying at the worst kind of moment when Macbeth should be thinking about the war and not mourning for her death. So Macbeth pauses. After hearing this news that are just coming to him, he just pauses from preparing for his attack and says one of the most famous speeches in this book. And here he is comparing life to a series of 4 images. So Macbeth compares life to a candle losing its flame. He's also comparing life to an actor or a stage player who is performing for hours on stage, but nobody gets to hear anything from him. And this specific speech is in Act 5, Scene 5, line 18 all the way to 27, where it says, "Tomorrow and all tomorrows lead to the end of time. Out, out, brief candle. Life's a walking shadow, a poor player that struts and frets his hour upon the stage and then is heard no more. It is a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury signifying nothing. At this point, a messenger arrives and informs Macbeth that the forest of Bramon Wood is moving. It's actually walking towards the castle. And this makes Macbeth doubt the visions of all the witches that have said and orders all his soldiers to fight the invaders outside the castle walls. In Act 5, Scene 6, outside Dunsinane Castle, Malcolm, the Seawards, and Macduff lead both armies to Macbeth's castle. Malcolm orders them to drop their tree branches because they're so close to the castle and announces that the Seawards will be leading the first attack. And this war begins in Scene 7, where Macbeth is attacked by the Seawards, but he kills young Seaward. And he is still hanging on the witch's prophecies, hoping that some of it might be true, but Macduff doesn't want to fight the ordinary soldiers. He says that the ghost of his family will haunt him if he doesn't kill Macbeth. Continuing on with the war in Scene 8, Macduff catches up with Macbeth, and Macbeth says that he doesn't want to kill Macduff because he has already killed his family, and Macduff then refuses to say anything further. His words were, "I have no words. My voice is in my sword." That's Act 5, Scene 8, line 7. And Macbeth tells Macduff that he cannot be killed by anyone born of a woman, but as it turns out, Macduff was prematurely born through C-section, and he says this in line 15, where he tells Macbeth that Macduff was born from his mother's womb untimely ripped, and with that offstage Macbeth is killed by Macduff, thus avenging his family. This war continues on into Scene 9, but Malcolm tells old Seward that his son was killed by Macbeth, and this saddens him, but he's content to know that his son died a soldier's death. And Macduff then enters the stage carrying Macbeth's head and says that Malcolm is the new king of Scotland. Hail King, for so thou art. That's Act 5, Scene 9, line 11. And Malcolm gives everyone who fought in that battle the royal title of Earl and invites everyone to Scone, which is the place where every single king in the land was crowned. And that is the end of Macbeth. I hope you enjoyed this part 2 of this episode. If you never listened to part 1, I recommend that you listen to it so that you can just follow through the story. This was a 30-minute episode, just similar to the other one, hour in total. That's why I'm doing part 1 and part 2, because it gets long sometimes. And if you'd want to listen to Hamlet, it's the first book of this season. Now we are left with 3 more tragedies, that is King Lear, Othello, and Romeo and Juliet. If you want to help me in my decision in making what will be the next book I review or summarize, please head on out to our social media pages, especially on Twitter at Podcast Mackenzie, Facebook and Instagram as well. Comment or send us a DM, and if you are an author and you want us to review your book, just drop us a DM and we can arrange something. But that is the end of this episode. I hope you enjoyed it. It's the end of Macbeth, the second tragedy of William Shakespeare. And if you have any questions, I'd love to see them right there on social media. But don't forget to comment, like, subscribe, share, everything. Do everything. And if you are on YouTube, drop that notification bell. I'll see it. Don't forget to comment Macbeth. I'll know you're a new subscriber when you comment Macbeth, or comment Care Life. That will make you a new subscriber. I'll know. We're also starting a Patreon page. Just check our description. You'll see our Patreon page. The support is amazing for these past 2 years. We all love you. XOXO. Goodbye. And that will be it for this week. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe so you're notified when a new episode is posted. Rate and review this podcast on your favorite podcasting app, especially Apple Podcasts, and share it with all your friends. Thank you so much for listening, and remember, creativity is intelligence having fun. Until next time, #PodRock.